everybody. My name is Isis, and this is Isis Says Hi. We got a new setup today. I'm trying to start, for starters, I'm getting my gaming PC finally. So excited. And so I am gonna be doing some reconfiguring of my desk yet again. I did some cable management without the cables, like the cable thing to like tighten everything together. So I'm gonna probably do that sometime this week. But then also I'm trying to leave space so that I can put like words and captions and pictures on my left side of me so it'll be easy to read, because I'm happy that the closed captioning that is auto-generated can pick up what I'm saying, but I also put the captions at the bottom instead of right here. So changing computers, moving stuff around, and then wanting to make things a little bit easier to read. So yeah, there's that. But anyways, my name is Isis, and this is Isis Says Hi. I do a lot of videos about topics that I'm interested in and do research about, compile them and put them in a video for you. Sometimes I do vlogs, and sometimes I randomly ramble about politics and other things. So if you like any of those things, please feel, oh my god, just spit on you, I'm so sorry. If you like any of those things, please feel free to subscribe. We're going to be talking about the nonprofit industrial complex, which is like it's a thing that exists. I've been interested in this topic for a while, especially when I heard about it when I was in grad school. Hopefully it's understandable. Let's get into the video. Audre Lorde tells us the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. All that means is we can't achieve change if we don't make sure we're all on the same page to achieve that change. And it's important to make sure that the words I use and the words that anybody else uses when they're talking about this make sense and are easy to understand and are accessible. So I'm going to give an example about this and why it's really important that when we're doing advocacy work and asking for people to come along on the cause, especially folks who might be at the center of certain issues, why we need to make sure that the language that we have is accessible to them. When I was an intern for an organization, I was talking to folks who were on a food line, because I was in the food kind of relief industry, food pantries, stuff like that. I was talking to them about the Trump administration cutting SNAP yet again, and we had these like postcards that they could send to the federal government, the USDA, which is in charge of making those kinds of regulations, to hopefully stop them from making the regulation or to at least stall them, because they have to read all of the comments on these regulations. And so I was talking to a lot of the folks who were on this food line, and I kept saying SNAP. That word was a word that they didn't fully understand. So SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and that's where a lot of people get their food benefits from. And so I kept saying that, and people either didn't understand or didn't really want to participate, partially because of that word. And it wasn't until somebody was asking me, what do you mean by SNAP? I was like, oh, you know, the thing where you like get it on your card so you can go to the grocery store, get food. And she was like, oh, you mean food stamps? I'm using the wrong words. And it's not that most of them wouldn't have understood SNAP. It's that most of them would be more familiar with food stamps. It would be a little bit more easier to connect. They're gonna feel more comfortable and they're gonna trust me way more. That's kind of what I mean by access. It's a very small example, but it's one that I always keep in the back of my head, because that is what advocacy is about. So people have a very weird, fluffy imagination when it comes to nonprofits. The National Council on Nonprofits even has that same fluffy imagination. They say charitable nonprofits embody the best of America. They provide a way for people to work together for the common good, transforming shared beliefs and hopes into action. Nonprofits are seen as the path toward making the world a better place. And while that is true for most, at least in the beginning, it ignores how not fully truthful that is. This is because of the nonprofit industrial complex. So the nonprofit industrial complex is a system of relationships between state, local, and federal governments, foundations or philanthropies, and nonprofit organizations. The nonprofit industrial complex restricts the actions of nonprofits, funneling the work in certain directions and walling off others. So for example, this year Jeff Bezos donated $100 million to Feeding America to combat food insecurity in the wake of COVID-19. This, of course, helped Bezos and a lot of Amazon executives look good at a time that him and Amazon are constantly criticized for their work conditions within their factories, as well as firing warehouse workers demanding safe working conditions during the pandemic. While $100 million may seem like a large sum, it's only 0.5% of Bezos' total wealth. We are taught to see the wealthy's charitable giving as proof of their moral character, instead of wondering how they came to have so much money in the first place. And before anybody comes talking to me about wealth and how that works, I know how it works. You do have general money that Jeff Bezos can use. $100 million, I'm assuming that there's a good chunk of change that is available to Jeff Bezos on hand. $100 million only being 0.5% of his total wealth is a lot. Like, I'm trying to figure out, well, how much do you actually have on hand if that's only 0.5%? So that's what I mean. And that's what's kind of insane. When I read that, I was like, oh, what the heck? What do you have that I don't have? Even when donations happen outside the public eye, there is a financial benefit. Individual donations to charities and giving to private foundations are tax deductible. While this is meant to give support or inspire support for organizations that serve the public good, it comes with a lot of unintended consequences. First, it makes private foundations a legal way for the wealthy to avoid paying taxes on their wealth. This cuts funding for public social services for working class people because paying taxes helps everybody. Second, it allows further wealth growth for the rich. In the United States, foundations are legally required to give away 5% of their assets annually in order to ensure they are active in charitable giving. However, they rarely choose to exceed this 5%, instead investing the vast majority of their endowment in the stock market and growing their assets without ever giving a substantial share to charities. Another fun fact is that only 7% of foundation grant giving went toward nonprofits that explicitly serve people of color. If a lot of foundations already give less than 5% and nonprofits still struggle, imagine nonprofits that are serving people of color. The structures of big philanthropy make it easy for nonprofits to become more invested in their funders' agendas than in the communities they serve. Merle Beam, author of Gay Inc., The Nonprofitization of Queer Politics, describes the effects of this process on the goals of queer liberation activism. As the movement has become more and more reliant on a small number of wealthy donors, as well as corporations and private philanthropy, the goals of the movement began to shift to be more in line with what those funders prioritize. As the IRS, which is the place we all pay our taxes to, defined a nonprofit as a business that has been granted a tax-exempt status because it furthers a social cause and provides a public benefit. And they are also tax-exempt, so they don't have to pay taxes on any money that comes into them because you're doing a good for the community. And this includes churches, which I feel like people don't know. When you see a nonprofit, they usually operate under a mission statement, which serves to establish the goals and functions of an organization by defining what it does, who it serves, how they do it, and where does its work. Nonprofits today include organizations that represent diverse causes and groups. Private hospitals, theater spaces, environmental organizations, human rights groups, advocacy groups, think tanks, and professional associations are all examples of nonprofits. For nonprofits to receive donated funds, they have to register as 501c3 organizations, and this allows most of them to access a lot of grant money from private philanthropers, foundations, corporations, and the government without having to pay income tax on that money. on the second half of the 20th century. First, the creation of the New Deal programs happened, and so these programs were designed to employ citizens directly by the government through the government agencies, and it didn't provide funding for private welfare agencies or social service organizations, so food pantries or orphanages were left out of still being helped and aided in these New Deal programs. And then the New Deal expanded the government's role in providing a lot of the services that these nonprofits were doing, and some of that includes unemployment compensation and aid to families with dependent children, which we now call TANF. I call it TANF, but that is temporary assistance to needy families. And then pretty much in the 80s, or kind of during the Reagan administration was when it really started, there was a huge hand in lessening the responsibilities of the government, and that is called decentralization. And so the decentralization of the federal government, so them kind of pushing off a lot of the responsibilities that they held, resulted in a really heavy reliance on nonprofits. So first, we get nonprofits kind of being left out of being given resources. Then we get the decentralization of the federal government, meaning now the needs are now being pushed back onto these nonprofits, which encourages even more needs of funding and leaning on more private funders. And so this is where the nonprofit industrial complex pretty much thrives. People working in nonprofits in the United States today are limited by the funding system that supports them, which you will hear all the time if you're talking to anybody who works within a nonprofit. And a bigger thing to also note, there is only so much that philanthropy or private foundations can do and the nonprofit sector can do to help America, their $19 trillion economy, or with a nation of 320 million people. When government funding is not enough for programs to respond to the community needs and provide services, nonprofits rely on foundations to fund their activities. In 2008, there were over 75,000 foundations in the United States who provided an estimated total of over $45.6 billion. And while foundation funding could present an alternative to government funding, grants from foundations have a lot of requirements that need to be met, and it can be difficult to meet some of those requirements. While some foundation grant requirements may fit with the mission of the organization, an organization may feel obligated to change its programs, sometimes even its mission statement, to fit the requirements of a grant application. And this is what is called mission drift. Sometimes funders won't donate or will stop donating if the organization no longer benefits them. This comes into play especially when they're giving huge amounts of money to your cause. When funders have agendas that are not the same as the mission of the organizations that they support or want to support, organizations then risk becoming vulnerable to mission drift. Mission drift is a term used to describe situations where an organization moves away from its original mission. Mission drift can result in tensions between staff and others involved in the organization, wasted resources, and loss of money. The possibility of mission drift directly challenges nonprofits to find a balance between seeking social justice and seeking funding. Outside of grant funding, there kind of is. In the article On Our Own Terms, 10 Years of Radical Community Building with Sista to Sista, 4 representatives of Sista to Sista, an organization that works with young women in New York, discuss the effects of avoiding foundation funding and what that meant for their 10-year existence. Can't wait till I get a camera where I don't have to start and stop every 5 seconds. First, Sista to Sista went through a group process that led to the decision to do away with paid staff and only engage in grassroots fundraising techniques. They concluded from their discussions that there are ways for social justice to continue through nonprofit work. We are not saying that all foundations are bad. We also are not of the belief that 501c3s are bad. We are trying to figure out different ways to live our values and model our vision. Another example is the Grassroots Institute for Fundraising, Training, which is also called GIFT, which is what I'm going to call it, is another resource for people seeking to resolve working within nonprofits and believing in social justice. GIFT seeks to promote the connection between fundraising, social justice, and movement building. GIFT trains people working for social justice on how to support their organizations in a way that they depend on the financial support of their community, not outside funders or government grants. They encourage organizations to build a large donor base that will invest not only financially in an organization, but that the organization will be held accountable in providing services that the community needs. What Gift is promoting, at least in one way, is community-centric fundraising. Community-centric fundraising provides a different framework for thinking about how power flows through organizations. Instead of allowing donors to be agenda setters in nonprofits, community-centric fundraising pushes donors to have deeper conversations about the mission of the organization. Mutual aid is when a community comes together to meet its people's intermediate material needs, especially in times of financial hardship. It can look like helping someone out who needs groceries, rent money, or a prescription refill. Mutual aid networks can also be used as vehicles for political education, resource sharing, and organizing. Mutual aid roots itself in the idea that if we all contribute, we come closer to making sure that everyone's needs are met. Mutual aid, in comparison to charity, is not just transactional, but an exercise in being in community with one another. Money given can strengthen the mutual aid work already being done, like checking in on elders, picking up prescriptions, or finding a bed for a mom who needed to move to a safe location in a hurry. When someone gets help, financial or otherwise, they are asked, "What can you offer to help us all get through?" The answers range from "I don't know," to prayers, to cook a meal, to work a phone bank. Many volunteers have themselves received aid from the fund, illustrating the two-way nature of mutual aid. A great example of mutual aid would be the Black Panther Party. So let's talk about some of the things that you might find to be familiar that the federal government now does that they actually originated. They have operated a youth center, a community learning center, free health clinics, sickle cell anemia screening centers, a free ambulance service, free breakfast for children projects, free food pantries, daycare centers, and much more. And they did this with little to no money. The Black Panther Party created a blueprint for federal programs and other nonprofits to create and sustain their programs. The Panthers were quite clear about the role their programs played in the community's life. Huey Newton said, "All these programs satisfy the deep needs of the community, but they are not solutions to our problems. That is why we call them survival programs, meaning survival pending revolution." The Panthers' programs were designed to be funded and sustained by the communities they served. Volunteers went door to door to collect donations from community members, food products that had not quite reached their expiration dates that were to be discarded by neighborhood grocers for quality control reasons that were taken by Panthers who used them for their breakfast and food pantry programs, which is something food pantries still do today. To get larger donations, Panther members explained to local businesses how their survival programs steadied the community in a way that worked to the long-term advantage of these companies. Certain programs were located in neighborhood churches, eliminating the cost of rent and made it possible for tax-deductible donations to the churches to be used to cover the cost of Panther programs. Volunteer labor removed payroll from program budgets. Even though foundation grants were pursued occasionally, the community essentially supported its own programs. This gave the Panthers the freedom to operate them as they pleased. I don't want this to come off as nonprofits are bad, because that's not what I'm saying. They help to address the symptoms of a broken system, but they do not have a strategy for addressing the main reason for it, which is mainly capitalism. Creating alternatives to the nonprofit industrial complex does mean that foundations might cease to exist, but that doesn't mean that people who are involved in doing that public good should go away. It means that they will be freed up to do their share of common thinking and building together what is needed to create the world that our children's deserve. That's the end of the video. Of course, let me know what you think. Be respectful. My sources are always going to be listed down below. And again, I don't want the takeaway from this to be about nonprofits being bad, because that's not what it is. It's talking about a real issue that I've seen and experienced when I worked in nonprofits to what still goes on now. I feel like that's something that it's okay to talk about. Like, it's not bad. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye!